In a sterile Silicon Valley conference room, a brilliant software engineer was about to face corporate execution. What started as a routine performance review took a shocking turn when they came face to face with their CEO's devastating judgment. Sarah Connor wasn't your typical tech employee. For 18 months, she had secretly developed revolutionary quantum encryption algorithms, known for her methodical brilliance. When Marcus Sterling delivered her termination for laziness, she had no idea she was walking into the catalyst for his empire's destruction. Sarah's dignified silence would lead to complete industry transformation. What began as humiliation would become revolution through patents. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights in Conference Room B cast everything in that particular shade of corporate white that made skin look sickly and dreams feel impossible. Sarah Connor sat across from Marcus Sterling, the mahogany table between them serving as both barrier and battleground. The CEO's perfectly pressed shirt gleamed under the harsh lighting, his Harvard MBA confidence radiating from every gesture. "Sarah," Sterling began, his voice carrying that practiced tone of false regret that executives perfected in leadership seminars. "I want you to know this isn't personal." The words hit like a physical blow, though Sarah's face remained impassive. She had learned long ago that showing weakness in corporate settings was like bleeding in shark-infested waters. Her hands remained folded in her lap, fingers interlaced to prevent trembling. "We've been evaluating team performance across all departments," Sterling continued, consulting his tablet as if her termination were just another quarterly metric. "Your technical contributions have been adequate, but leadership requires more than just coding skills." Adequate. The word burned through Sarah's chest. 3 years of debugging systems that no one else could touch. Countless nights spent unraveling security vulnerabilities that would have cost the company millions. All reduced to adequate. Your lack of engagement during team meetings, the distraction during presentations, the time management issues. Sterling's voice carried the rehearsed rhythm of someone who'd given this speech before. "We need team players, Sarah. People who understand our corporate vision." Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Time management issues. If only they knew where her distracted hours actually went. While they held their endless meetings about synergy and market penetration, she'd been solving problems that would reshape the entire cybersecurity landscape. Her laziness during office hours had been exhaustion from working until 3 a.m. on breakthrough algorithms. The memory surfaced unbidden. Last Tuesday night, hunched over her personal laptop in her apartment, coffee cups forming rings on every surface, whiteboards covered in quantum mechanics equations. The moment when the pieces finally clicked into place. The encryption algorithm that had consumed her thoughts for 18 months suddenly revealing its elegant structure. She'd sat there at 2:47 a.m., staring at code that would render every existing security protocol obsolete. How naive that seemed now. "The decision has been made," Sterling said, finally looking directly at her. His blue eyes held no warmth, only the calculated distance of someone who viewed employees as replaceable assets. "Your position is being eliminated, effective immediately." "Marcus, wait." Emily Mitchell's voice cut through the sterile air like a lifeline. Sarah's closest friend at Nexus Dynamics had been silent until now, her marketing director instincts probably calculating the political cost of intervention. "Sarah's contributions to the encryption protocols alone are noted in her file," Sterling interrupted, his tone sharpening. "But technical competence isn't enough in today's collaborative environment. We need people who can communicate vision, not just execute code." Sarah felt something crystallize inside her chest, cold and sharp as winter glass. The irony was so perfect it almost made her laugh. Here was Marcus Sterling, a man who'd built his empire through acquisitions and buzzword presentations, lecturing her about vision. He understood cybersecurity, the way an art dealer understood paint. He knew how to sell it, but the actual creation remained a mystery. "I understand," Sarah said quietly, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her ribcage. She understood more than Sterling realized. She understood that he'd just made the most catastrophic business decision in Nexus Dynamics history. Janet Morrison from HR slid a folder across the table, the severance paperwork rustling like dead leaves. Your final paycheck includes 2 weeks' salary and the vacation time you've accrued. Security will escort you to your desk to collect personal items. Personal items. Sarah almost smiled at that. Her most valuable personal item wasn't in her desk drawer. It was encoded in the hard drive of her laptop, sitting safely at home. 18 months of breakthrough research that would soon make Marcus Sterling's arrogance seem laughable. One more thing, Sterling said, leaning forward with the satisfied expression of someone delivering what he thought was a final blow. The non-compete clause in your contract remains in effect. 2 years, as you'll recall. Our innovations. Sarah's lips pressed together in what might have been mistaken for resignation. If Sterling only knew that his most valuable corporate asset was about to walk out the door in her head, carrying knowledge that would make his precious non-compete clause utterly meaningless. The security escort arrived. Jim Patterson, whose sheepdog loyalty to corporate policy had always annoyed her. The walk to her desk felt like a perp walk, every colleague averting their eyes or offering those meaningless sympathetic smiles that meant nothing and cost less. Sarah packed methodically, her movements precise and controlled. Each item that went into the cardboard box felt like a small death, but also like a liberation. The coffee mug with the faded computer science department logo. The stress ball shaped like a binary tree. The small notebook where she'd jotted down ideas that Sterling had dismissed as too theoretical. I'm sorry about this, Emily whispered, appearing beside the desk with tears in her eyes. This is insane. They don't know what they're losing. Sarah looked up from her packing, meeting her friend's gaze with something that might have been gratitude. They'll figure it out soon enough. Something in her tone made Emily step back slightly, a shadow of confusion crossing her features. But there was no time for explanations, no way to communicate that this moment, this humiliation, was actually the beginning of something much larger. The elevator ride down felt eternal, Jim Patterson's uncomfortable silence filling the small space like toxic gas. Through the glass walls of the lobby, Sarah could see the Nexus Dynamics logo gleaming in brushed steel, the corporate motto beneath it, securing tomorrow's world today. The irony was so sharp it could cut glass. The afternoon sun hit her face as she stepped outside, cardboard box balanced in her arms, personal laptop bag slung over her shoulder. Behind her, Nexus Dynamics rose into the San Francisco sky like a monument to corporate hubris. Sarah Connor walked toward her car, her steps steady despite the chaos in her chest. Inside her laptop bag, encoded in algorithms that Sterling couldn't even pronounce, was the future of cybersecurity and the key to his downfall. He'd called her lazy and uncommitted, never realizing that her real work happened in the quiet hours when corporate vision gave way to actual innovation. As she drove away from Nexus Dynamics for the last time, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months of corporate humiliation: hope. Dark, complicated hope, tinged with the promise of justice. Sterling had just fired the one person who could have saved his company. Instead, she would become the architect of its destruction. The future, Sarah realized, was about to become very interesting indeed. Sarah's apartment door closed behind her with the finality of a coffin lid. The cardboard box from Nexus Dynamics sat on her kitchen counter like evidence of a crime she hadn't committed, while her laptop bag rested against the wall, innocent-looking, containing algorithms that would soon rewrite the rules of corporate warfare. The silence felt different now. No longer the peaceful quiet of evening solitude, but the hollow emptiness of unemployment. Sarah moved through her living room, past the whiteboard still covered in quantum mechanics equations, past the coffee-stained notebooks filled with breakthrough calculations. Her workspace looked like the laboratory of a mad scientist, which wasn't far from the truth. She opened her laptop with trembling fingers. The screen glowed to life, displaying folders labeled with innocuous names that masked their revolutionary contents. QE_project_final. Encryption_tests_March. Implementation_notes. 18 months of her life, distilled into lines of code that Marcus Sterling would never understand. Sarah ran the comprehensive test suite she'd developed, watching as her quantum encryption algorithm processed data streams that would have taken conventional methods hours to handle. The results cascaded across her screen in elegant green text, each successful test confirming what she'd suspected but hadn't dared fully believe. Her algorithm didn't just improve existing cybersecurity, it made it obsolete. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Every security system currently protecting banks, governments, corporations, all of it vulnerable to quantum computing advances that were no longer theoretical but imminent. Her code provided the only viable defense, the digital equivalent of a nuclear shield, in a world about to discover atomic weapons. And Nexus Dynamics had just fired the person who created it. Sarah's phone buzzed. Her mother's contact photo appeared, Grace Williams, smiling in her work uniform from the hotel where she'd spent 15 years cleaning rooms to pay for Sarah's education. The irony wasn't lost on her. The woman who'd sacrificed everything so her daughter could succeed in the tech world was calling on the day that world had rejected her. Sarah, love. Grace's accent still carried traces of County Cork despite decades in America. How was your day? The simple question nearly broke her. I was fired, Mom. Silence stretched across the connection. Then Grace's voice, steady and practical as always. The fools don't know what they've lost, do they? Despite everything, Sarah smiled. Her mother had never understood the technical aspects of her work, but she'd always understood its value. No, Mom. They really don't. Come home for dinner Sunday. We'll talk about what comes next. What comes next? Sarah stared at her screen, at code that could reshape entire industries. What came next was bigger than finding another job, bigger than nursing wounded pride. What came next was power. After ending the call, Sarah opened a new browser window and began researching patent law. The U.S. Patent and Trademark Office website felt like foreign territory, filled with legal jargon that made her head spin. But buried in the dense documentation, she found what she needed: software patents, intellectual property protection, the legal framework that transformed ideas into weapons. Her algorithm qualified. More than qualified. It was revolutionary enough to command licensing fees that would make tech giants weep. The process would take months, maybe years, but the end result would be worth the wait. Sarah scrolled through patent attorney listings, looking for someone who understood both technology and the cutthroat nature of Silicon Valley litigation. Most of the lawyers looked like corporate clones, Harvard grads who'd never written a line of code. But one profile caught her attention: John Black, former software engineer turned intellectual property attorney. His bio mentioned David versus Goliath cases, inventors who'd been screwed by corporations. Someone who would understand her situation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She drafted an email, choosing her words carefully. The quantum encryption breakthrough was too valuable to describe fully in electronic communication, but she needed to convey enough to secure a meeting. After 3 rewrites, she hit send. Sarah leaned back in her chair, staring at the whiteboards that had become her temporary prison and laboratory. The equations staring back at her represented more than theoretical breakthroughs. They represented revenge. Not the petty, destructive kind that consumed people, but the elegant justice of superior innovation overwhelming corporate arrogance. Marcus Sterling thought he'd eliminated a problem employee. Instead, he'd created his own executioner. Her laptop chimed with an incoming email. John Black had replied within 20 minutes, his response brief but intriguing. Your message suggests you've developed something significant. I'd like to hear more. Are you available tomorrow at 2 p.m.? Sarah typed back her confirmation, then closed the laptop. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of transforming from victim to victor. Tonight, she would savor the irony of Sterling's catastrophic mistake. She walked to her kitchen and opened a bottle of wine, not to celebrate, but to mark a transition. The woman who'd been humiliated in conference room B was gone. In her place sat someone who understood that the best revenge wasn't getting mad. It was getting patents. The city lights twinkled beyond her apartment window, each one representing a company that would soon need her technology to survive. Somewhere in that glittering landscape, Marcus Sterling was probably celebrating his decision to eliminate dead weight from his workforce. Sarah raised her glass in a mock toast to her former boss. He'd taught her valuable lessons about power, judgment, and the cost of underestimating brilliant minds. Soon, she would return the favor. The elevator climbed toward the 15th floor, carrying Sarah toward what she hoped would be vindication. John Black's law office occupied a converted warehouse in Soma, far from the gleaming corporate towers where most patent attorneys practiced. Through the elevator's glass walls, she could see the industrial bones of the building: exposed brick, steel beams, the honest architecture of a space that valued function over appearance. Sarah clutched her laptop bag tighter. Inside lay 18 months of breakthrough research, compressed into algorithms that could reshape the digital world. The weight felt both insignificant and enormous, like carrying a nuclear weapon disguised as a paperweight. The elevator doors opened to reveal a reception area that looked more like a tech startup than a law firm. Exposed ductwork ran along the ceiling, while vintage computer equipment served as decoration: an original Apple II, a first-generation IBM PC, monuments to the innovation that built Silicon Valley. The message was clear. This was a place where technology and law intersected with mutual respect. Dr. Connor? A woman emerged from behind a modern desk, her smile genuine rather than corporate. Mr. Black is ready for you. John Black's office continued the theme. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay, bookshelves filled with patent law texts and computer science journals, a workstation displaying code on multiple monitors. The man himself stood with his back to the door, silhouetted against the afternoon light filtering through San Francisco's perpetual haze. He turned as Sarah entered, revealing a face that looked like it had seen both triumph and disappointment in equal measure. 40-something, with prematurely gray hair and eyes that assessed her with the calculating intensity of someone who'd learned to read people's motivations quickly. Dr. Connor. His handshake was firm, professional. Your email was intriguing. Quantum encryption breakthrough, potential patent application. That's either revolutionary or delusional, and frankly, I see more of the latter in this business. Sarah appreciated his directness. Then you'll be interested to know which category I fall into. She opened her laptop on his conference table, the screen coming to life with folders that looked innocuous but contained digital dynamite. Before we begin, I need to know something. How do you feel about former employers who undervalue innovation? John's expression shifted slightly, something darker flickering behind his professional demeanor. I assume you're asking because you've been undervalued yourself. Fired yesterday. My CEO called my work adequate and my commitment questionable. Sarah's voice remained steady, but the words still carried their sting. He has no idea what he just walked away from. Marcus Sterling. It wasn't a question. John's research had clearly been thorough. Nexus Dynamics. Harvard MBA who built an empire on acquisitions rather than innovation. I've seen his type before. Something in his tone made Sarah look up from her laptop. Personal experience? John walked to his bookshelf, pulling down a framed patent certificate. Method and apparatus for distributed network security monitoring. Filed in 2018, approved in 2020. Revolutionary at the time, would have changed how we detect cyber attacks. He set it on the table between them. My former employer claimed it was work for hire, despite the fact that I developed it entirely on my own time. Legal battle lasted 3 years. Did you win? Technically. But by the time the courts ruled in my favor, they'd already implemented a modified version and moved on to newer technologies. I got justice and a worthless piece of paper. His smile held no warmth. That's when I learned that being right isn't enough. You need to be strategic. Sarah understood. They were kindred spirits, casualties of a system that valued corporate politics over genuine innovation. What I'm about to show you will make your patent look like a children's toy, but I need to know you'll help me use it properly. Show me. Sarah opened her quantum encryption demonstration, her fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced precision. Code cascaded across the screen, elegant and deadly. She ran the test suite, watching John's expression change as the implications became clear. Jesus Christ. He leaned forward, studying the output data. This isn't just an improvement on existing encryption. This is the end of cybersecurity as we know it. Sarah's voice carried quiet pride in something darker. Every security system currently protecting sensitive data will be vulnerable within 5 years as quantum computing advances. This algorithm provides the only viable defense. John was quiet for a long moment, his mind clearly racing through the implications. Nexus Dynamics' entire business model becomes obsolete overnight. Sarah closed the laptop, the screen going dark like a curtain falling on Sterling's empire. Marcus Sterling fired the one person who could have saved his company. Instead, I'm going to become the architect of its destruction. The patent application process will take months, maybe years. I have time. And now I have the right attorney. Sarah met his gaze directly. The question is, are you ready to help me turn intellectual property law into a weapon? John Black smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. Dr. Connor, I thought you'd never ask. They spent the next hour discussing strategy, timelines, the delicate dance of patent applications, and corporate warfare. As the afternoon light faded over San Francisco Bay, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since her termination: hope backed by competent allies. Marcus Sterling had taught her about power and humiliation. John Black would teach her how to wield justice like a scalpel, cutting with precision rather than blind fury. The revolution was about to begin. But revolutions rarely announced themselves with fanfare. 3 floors above Sarah's former desk, Marcus Sterling was discovering that some battles were lost before you realized you were fighting them. Michael Thompson stared at his monitor, the cursor blinking mockingly at the end of a half-finished function that should have taken him 20 minutes to complete. Instead, he'd been wrestling with it for 3 days, his confidence evaporating like morning fog in the San Francisco heat. The encryption protocol that Sarah had maintained effortlessly now felt like trying to perform surgery with mittens on. Any progress on the Hartwell Industries patch? Emily Mitchell appeared beside his cubicle, her marketing director smile strained around the edges. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she'd been fielding increasingly frantic client calls. Michael's jaw tightened. It's more complex than I initially assessed. The security vulnerability runs deeper than the documentation indicated. Translation: he was drowning and they both knew it. Emily's diplomatic nod couldn't hide her growing concern. Sarah would have diagnosed the problem in minutes, crafted an elegant solution before lunch, and documented it so clearly that even Michael could have implemented it. Instead, Hartwell Industries was threatening to terminate their contract, while their newly hired replacement struggled with code that might as well have been written in ancient Sanskrit. Maybe we could bring in a consultant, Michael suggested, hating how desperate he sounded. Someone with specialized experience in legacy encryption systems. Emily's smile became genuinely sympathetic. Marcus has made it clear that we handle this internally. Team building exercise, he called it. Team building. Michael wanted to laugh. More like watching the Titanic's crew rearrange deck chairs while water rushed through the hull. But Emily wasn't the enemy here. She was just another casualty of Sterling's monumental stupidity. Across the office, Sterling himself paced behind the glass walls of his corner office, his usual swagger replaced by the rigid posture of a man under pressure. Victoria Hayes, the veteran board member who'd built her reputation on recognizing patterns before they became crises, sat across from his desk with the calm intensity of a predator evaluating prey. Client satisfaction scores have dropped 12% this quarter. Victoria's voice carried through the supposedly soundproof glass. Security incidents are up 30%. Revenue projections are being revised downward for the 3rd consecutive month. Sterling's response was muffled, but his defensive gestures spoke volumes. Victoria's expression remained neutral, But Michael caught her glance towards Sarah's empty desk, the same glance she'd made 3 times during this conversation. Everyone was thinking it. Nobody was saying it. Michael's phone buzzed with another emergency support ticket. Meridian Bank was experiencing intermittent failures in their authentication system, the same system Sarah had optimized 6 months ago. The same system that had run flawlessly until last week, when Michael's improvements had introduced instabilities he couldn't identify, let alone fix. He closed his eyes, remembering his interview with Sterling, the confidence he'd radiated, the buzzwords he'd deployed like weapons. Agile methodologies, scalable solutions, paradigm-shifting innovation, all the corporate speak that had impressed a CEO who confused vocabulary with competence. Sarah had been in the room during that interview, silent in the corner, taking notes. He'd assumed she was documenting his brilliance for the transition process. Now he suspected she'd been cataloging his ignorance, recognizing that Sterling was about to replace expertise with enthusiasm. Emily returned to his cubicle, her expression grim. Hartwell just called. They're giving us 48 hours to resolve the vulnerability, or they're terminating the contract. 48 hours? Michael's voice cracked slightly. Emily, this could take weeks to properly debug. Then we better hope for a miracle. Emily's tone was gentle, but her meaning was clear. They were all tied to the same sinking ship. Victoria Hayes emerged from Sterling's office, her face a mask of professional neutrality that fooled no one. She paused beside Emily, lowering her voice to barely above a whisper. Have we considered reaching out to Dr. Connor? Perhaps a consulting arrangement? Emily's eyes widened slightly. Even suggesting contact with Sarah was tantamount to admitting Sterling's decision had been catastrophic. Marcus was very clear about the non-compete implications. Non-compete clauses don't typically apply to emergency consulting. Victoria's smile was razor-thin. And this is starting to feel like an emergency. Michael watched the exchange with growing dread. If they were discussing bringing Sarah back, even temporarily, then the situation was worse than he'd realized. His replacement of her wasn't just inadequate, it was potentially company-threatening. As Victoria walked away, Emily pulled out her personal phone. Michael caught her scrolling through contacts, pausing at a name that made her expression shift from desperation to something approaching hope. Emily, he said quietly, what aren't you telling me? She looked up from her phone, her professional mask slipping to reveal exhaustion and fear. Michael, I think we're in trouble. Real trouble. The kind that ends careers and closes companies. Through the glass walls, Sterling continued his pacing, oblivious to the fact that his empire was beginning to crumble, one failed patch, one lost client, one impossible technical challenge at a time. 3 miles away, Sarah Connor sat in her apartment, her patent application moving through its initial review stages, while the company that had dismissed her struggled with problems she could solve in her sleep. Sometimes justice came not as a lightning bolt, but as the slow recognition that some mistakes were too fundamental to survive. The email arrived at 8:47 a.m. on a Tuesday that would forever divide Sarah's life into before and after. She was nursing her second cup of coffee, reviewing quantum mechanics equations that had become as familiar as old friends, when her laptop chimed with the notification that changed everything. U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Application status update. Sarah's heart stopped. 6 months of waiting, of watching Nexus Dynamics struggle with problems she could solve blindfolded, of building her case with John Black while Sterling's empire slowly hemorrhaged talent and credibility. 6 months of wondering if her breakthrough was truly as revolutionary as she believed, or if she was deluding herself with revenge fantasies. Her finger hovered over the email, the cursor trembling slightly. Rejection would mean starting over, possibly years of appeals and modifications. Approval would mean vindication, power, and the kind of justice that Marcus Sterling couldn't buy his way out of. She clicked. Congratulations. Your patent application for quantum-resistant encryption algorithm with dynamic key generation has been approved. Patent number US 11,847,293 has been officially granted. Sarah stared at the screen, reading the words 3 times before they penetrated the fog of disbelief. Approved. Official. Granted. The algorithms that Sterling had dismissed as the product of a lazy employee were now legally protected intellectual property, recognized by the United States government as genuine innovation worthy of protection. Her phone buzzed immediately. John Black, probably monitoring the patent database like a hawk. Congratulations, Dr. Connor. You are now the legal owner of what may be the most valuable piece of intellectual property in cybersecurity. How does it feel to hold the keys to the kingdom? Sarah's laugh was shaky, bordering on hysteria. Terrifying, exhilarating, like I just won the lottery and declared war simultaneously. That's about right. I'm already fielding inquiries from companies who've been monitoring the patent database. Word travels fast in Silicon Valley when someone files something this significant. The implications crashed over her like a tsunami. Every major tech company, every government agency, every financial institution, all of them would need her algorithm as quantum computing advanced from theoretical threat to practical reality. The licensing fees alone would make her wealthy beyond Sterling's comprehension. But wealth wasn't the point. Justice was. John, I want you to prepare licensing agreements for everyone except Nexus Dynamics. Fair terms, reasonable fees. Let's show the industry what ethical business practices look like. And Sterling's company? Sarah's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Marcus Sterling can watch his empire become obsolete, while everyone else moves into the future. He wanted to judge my commitment and vision? Let's see how his vision holds up when reality comes knocking. Within hours, her phone became a battlefield. Ryan Stone from TechFlow Industries called personally, his voice carrying the urgency of someone who recognized a paradigm shift when he saw one. Dr. Connor, I've reviewed your patent filing. This is extraordinary work, the kind of breakthrough that defines decades of technological advancement. I'd like to discuss licensing terms immediately. Sarah found herself liking Stone's directness. No corporate doublespeak, no attempts to minimize her achievement. Just straightforward recognition of innovation and its value. I'm accepting reasonable licensing proposals from companies that demonstrate genuine respect for technical talent. Then we should meet. I believe in rewarding the people who actually create the future, not just the ones who take credit for it. The dig at Sterling was subtle, but unmistakable. Word of her termination had spread through Silicon Valley's interconnected networks, becoming cautionary tale and gossip in equal measure. The brilliant engineer fired for being uncommitted, who then developed technology that made her former employer's products obsolete overnight. By afternoon, Sarah's apartment had become mission control for a revolution she never intended to lead. Her mother Grace arrived with homemade soup, and the kind of practical wisdom that only comes from watching dreams deferred and justice delayed. You're different, Grace observed, studying her daughter's face as Sarah fielded calls from companies around the world. Stronger, more sure of yourself. Sarah paused between conversations, considering her mother's words. I spent years trying to prove my worth to people who couldn't recognize talent if it solved their problems for free. Now I don't need their approval anymore. And what about forgiveness? The question hung in the air like incense, heavy with moral complexity. Sarah looked out her apartment window toward the gleaming towers of downtown San Francisco, where Marcus Sterling was probably holding emergency meetings about the technological earthquake that had just reshaped his industry. I'm not trying to destroy him, Mom. I'm just refusing to save him. Grace nodded slowly, understanding the distinction that might be lost on others. This wasn't about revenge. It was about consequences. Sterling had made his choice when he decided that corporate politics mattered more than genuine innovation. Now he would live with the results. Sarah's laptop chimed again. Another email, this one from a company she didn't recognize. Then another. And another. The avalanche had begun. Every tech company with half a brain was scrambling to license technology that would soon become essential for survival in a quantum computing world. All except one. Nexus Dynamics remained conspicuously absent from the flood of licensing inquiries. Sarah wondered if Sterling even understood what had happened yet, if his business school training had prepared him to recognize existential threats disguised as patent applications. He would learn soon enough. John Black arrived that evening with champagne and contracts, his expression mixing celebration with the predatory satisfaction of someone who'd waited years for this moment. Sarah, you've just become one of the most powerful people in Silicon Valley. The question is, what are you going to do with that power? Sarah accepted the champagne, but her smile remained complicated, layered with possibilities both bright and dark. Through her window, the city sparkled with the lights of 1,000 companies that would soon depend on her innovation for their survival. Somewhere in that glittering landscape, Marcus Sterling was about to discover that some employees shouldn't be underestimated, and some mistakes couldn't be fixed with corporate restructuring. The future belonged to those who could see it coming. Sarah Connor had not only seen it, she had built it, one line of revolutionary code at a time. The future belonged to those who could see it coming, but Marcus Sterling had always been better at selling tomorrow than actually building it. He discovered this fundamental flaw in his vision at 9:23 a.m. on a Wednesday that would mark the beginning of his empire's end. "Sir, we have a problem." Janet Morrison from HR stood in his office doorway, her usual composed demeanor replaced by something approaching panic. "It's about Dr. Connor." Sterling looked up from his quarterly projections, irritation flashing across his features. "The terminated employee? What about her? She's been granted a patent. Quantum encryption. The industry analysts are calling it revolutionary." The words hit Sterling like a physical blow. Sarah Connor, the woman he'd dismissed as lazy and uncommitted, held a patent that industry experts were describing in terms usually reserved for Nobel Prize discoveries. He grabbed his tablet, fingers flying across the screen as he pulled up the patent filing. Quantum-resistant encryption algorithm with dynamic key generation. The technical language meant nothing to him, but the implications section made his blood run cold. Every existing cybersecurity protocol would become vulnerable as quantum computing advanced. Every company in the industry would need this technology to survive. Every company except the one that had fired its creator. "Get Victoria Hayes on the line." Sterling's voice carried an edge that made Janet step back. "Emergency board meeting. Now." The conference room filled with the kind of tension that preceded corporate executions. Victoria Hayes sat at the far end of the table, her expression unreadable as Sterling paced like a caged animal. Emily Mitchell occupied the middle ground, her marketing director instincts calculating damage control scenarios. Michael Thompson hunched in his chair, finally understanding why the technical challenges had been insurmountable. "How did we miss this?" Sterling's voice cracked slightly. "How did no one know she was working on something this significant?" Victoria's smile was arctic. "Perhaps because you were too busy evaluating her commitment to corporate vision rather than her actual contributions to corporate survival." The barb hit its mark. Sterling's jaw tightened as the full scope of his catastrophic judgment became clear. Sarah Connor hadn't been distracted or lazy. She'd been developing technology that would reshape the entire cybersecurity landscape. While he'd been lecturing her about team players and collaboration, she'd been solving problems that his entire company couldn't handle. Emily cleared her throat nervously. "Marcus, we need to consider immediate outreach. If we could negotiate licensing terms." "She won't take our calls." Michael's voice was barely above a whisper. "I tried reaching out yesterday. Her attorney returned the call. They're not interested in discussions with Nexus Dynamics." Sterling stopped pacing. "Her attorney?" "John Black, intellectual property specialist. He was very polite about declining our interest." Victoria leaned forward, her political instincts engaged. "Marcus, do you understand what this means? Every competitor will have access to next-generation encryption technology. We'll be selling typewriters in the age of smartphones." The metaphor was brutal in its accuracy. Sterling's company had built its reputation on security software that was about to become as relevant as a horse-drawn carriage. Worse, the woman who could have saved them, who could have made Nexus Dynamics the exclusive provider of revolutionary technology, was now positioned to watch their empire crumble. Sterling's phone buzzed with a news alert. TechFlow Industries announces major licensing agreement for quantum encryption technology. Ryan Stone's company had moved fast, securing access to Sarah's patent within hours of its approval. Other companies would follow, creating a technological arms race that would leave Nexus Dynamics increasingly isolated. Our stock price, Victoria observed quietly, is going to react very poorly to this news. She was right. By market close, Nexus Dynamics had lost 18% of its value as investors recognized the existential threat posed by a patent held by a woman the company had recently terminated. The irony was so perfect it felt orchestrated by a malevolent universe. Emily's phone rang constantly, clients expressing concern, competitors offering assistance, journalists seeking comments about the Connor patent and its implications for industry leader Nexus Dynamics. Each conversation was a small humiliation, a reminder that they were now the company that had fired the person who created the future. Sterling stared out his office window at the San Francisco skyline, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. Somewhere in that sprawling city, Sarah Connor was fielding licensing offers that would make her wealthy beyond calculation. The woman he'd dismissed as inadequate now held the power to determine which companies survived the coming technological revolution. And she'd made it clear that Nexus Dynamics wasn't invited to participate. Victoria appeared beside him, her presence carrying the weight of board authority and 20 years of corporate warfare. Marcus, we need to discuss transition planning. Transition to what? New leadership. The board is concerned about recent strategic decisions. Sterling turned to face her, seeing his own mortality reflected in her calculating gaze. The woman he'd fired 6 months ago was about to destroy his career without lifting a finger, simply by refusing to save the company that had rejected her genius. How long do I have? Victoria's smile held no warmth. That depends entirely on how quickly you can convince Sarah Connor to take your call. Outside his window, the city continued its relentless pursuit of innovation and profit, indifferent to the corporate dramas playing out in glass towers. But somewhere in that maze of ambition and technology, Sarah Connor sat with the power to reshape everything Marcus Sterling thought he understood about success, failure, and the true cost of underestimating brilliant minds. The reckoning had begun, and justice wore the face of a woman he'd once called lazy. But Sarah Connor was discovering that power carried its own weight, pressing down on her shoulders like a lead blanket she couldn't remove. Her apartment had become a command center for revenge she'd never intended to orchestrate. Licensing agreements covered her kitchen table. Her phone buzzed with offers from companies worldwide, and her bank account swelled with numbers that still felt surreal. Yet none of it brought the satisfaction she'd expected. The knock on her door came at 7 p.m., soft but insistent. Through the peephole, Sarah saw her mother standing in the hallway, holding a casserole dish like a peace offering to gods she didn't quite understand. Mom. Sarah opened the door, surprised by how much she needed the familiar comfort of Grace Williams' presence. You look tired, love. Grace stepped inside, her eyes taking in the chaos of success scattered across every surface. Success isn't supposed to make you look haunted. They sat at Sarah's small dining table, pushing aside patent documents to make room for homemade shepherd's pie. Grace ate quietly, her experienced eyes studying her daughter's face with the precision of someone who'd learned to read emotional weather patterns. Something's troubling you, Grace said finally. Sarah's phone buzzed with another message from Emily Mitchell, the third desperate attempt to reach her that week. Each message grew more frantic, describing layoffs, client defections, the slow-motion collapse of careers that had nothing to do with Sterling's arrogance. There are people at Nexus Dynamics who don't deserve what's happening to them, Sarah said quietly. Emily defended me. Michael is just a kid who got in over his head. Even Victoria Hayes was just trying to protect the company. Grace nodded slowly. And you're wondering if justice means punishing the innocent, along with the guilty. I wanted to prove Sterling wrong. I wanted him to face consequences for dismissing people like they're disposable. Sarah's voice carried the weight of months of accumulated anger. But watching his company die means watching good people lose their livelihoods. Her laptop chimed with an incoming call. Ryan Stone's face appeared on the screen, his expression serious, despite the technological triumph they'd achieved together. Sarah, I hope you don't mind the interruption. I wanted to discuss something important. Of course. I've been thinking about what you said regarding ethical business practices. What if we could create something positive from this situation? My company is expanding rapidly thanks to your technology. We could offer positions to displaced Nexus Dynamics employees, fair wages, equity participation, the kind of environment where innovation is rewarded rather than punished. The offer struck Sarah like lightning. Here was a path she hadn't considered, not just refusing to save Sterling's empire, but actively building something better from its ashes. Justice through construction rather than destruction. After ending the call, Sarah sat in the gathering darkness of her apartment. Her mother's gentle presence anchored her as she wrestled with questions that had no easy answers. Your father used to say that the measure of a person wasn't how they handled success, but how they used it, Grace said softly. You have power now, Sarah. The question is what kind of person that power makes you. Sarah's phone displayed 17 missed calls from Nexus Dynamics, desperate attempts to reach her as Sterling's world collapsed. She could ignore them, watch the company implode, while she built her new empire with Ryan Stone. Or she could find a way to separate justice from vengeance, consequences from cruelty. Emily's latest message appeared on her screen. Sarah, please. I know you have every reason to hate us, but there are people here who believed in you, who tried to protect you. We're not all Marcus Sterling. Grace reached across the table, her weathered hand covering Sarah's. What does your heart tell you, love? Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of choice pressing down like gravity itself. Tomorrow, she would have to decide whether justice required Sterling's complete destruction, or if true victory meant rising above the desire for revenge. The moral crossroads stretched before her, each path leading to a different version of herself. She would have to choose carefully, not just for Sterling or her former colleagues, but for the woman she wanted to become. The woman she wanted to become walked through the glass doors of Nexus Dynamics at 10 a.m. sharp, her footsteps echoing in the marble lobby like a countdown to Judgment Day. Sarah Connor had spent a sleepless night wrestling with moral complexity, and she'd emerged with clarity that felt both terrifying and liberating. The security guard's double-take was almost comical. 6 months ago, she'd been escorted out with a cardboard box and wounded pride. Now she returned as the most powerful person in cybersecurity, holding patents that could determine which companies survived the quantum revolution. Dr. Connor, the receptionist stammered, clearly unprepared for this moment. Mr. Sterling is. He's waiting for you in Conference Room B. Conference Room B. The same sterile space where Sterling had delivered his lecture about team players and corporate vision. Sarah's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. The universe had a sense of irony that bordered on the artistic. Sterling stood with his back to the door when she entered, his silhouette familiar but diminished. The confidence that had once filled every corner of the room had shrunk, replaced by the brittle posture of a man who'd discovered that some mistakes couldn't be undone with charm and Harvard Business School tactics. Sarah. He turned, and she was struck by how much he'd aged in 6 months. The lines around his eyes had deepened. His perfect corporate composure cracked like a facade under pressure. Thank you for coming. Marcus. She took the same seat she'd occupied during her termination, the symmetry deliberate and devastating. You wanted to discuss licensing terms. I wanted to apologize. The words seemed to cost him physical effort. I made a mistake. A catastrophic mistake. I let corporate politics cloud my judgment about your value to this company. Sarah studied his face, searching for genuine remorse beneath the desperation. You called my work adequate. You questioned my commitment. You fired me in front of HR like I was dead weight. I was wrong. Sterling's voice cracked slightly. I was completely devastatingly wrong. Your patent, it's revolutionary. It's going to change everything, and I was too arrogant to see it. And now you want to license it. I want to save my company. The admission hung between them like a confession at a trial. Sarah, there are 300 people working here. Good people who had nothing to do with my decision. Emily Mitchell, who always defended you. Michael Thompson, who's struggling but trying to learn. If Nexus Dynamics fails, they all suffer. Sarah felt the weight of those 300 lives pressing against her chest. This was the moral crossroads her mother had warned her about. The moment where justice could become indistinguishable from vengeance if she wasn't careful. You're asking me to save the company that fired me for being lazy. I'm asking you to be better than I was. Sterling's mask finally slipped completely, revealing something raw and desperate beneath. I'm asking you to show the kind of leadership I failed to demonstrate. Sarah leaned back in her chair, studying the man who'd once held absolute power over her career. What makes you think I owe you anything? What makes you think I owe Nexus Dynamics a chance at survival? Because you're not me. The words came out quietly, carrying the weight of self-recognition. Because you actually understand what leadership means. Because destroying me won't give you the satisfaction you think it will. The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and judgment. Through the glass walls, Sarah could see employees trying not to stare, their faces etched with the kind of fear that came from watching careers hang in the balance. If I were to consider licensing, Sarah said finally, her voice carefully controlled, it wouldn't be on standard terms. It would require significant changes to how this company operates. Sterling leaned forward, hope flickering in his eyes. What kind of changes? The kind that ensure brilliant minds are recognized, rather than dismissed. The kind that value innovation over politics. The kind that treat employees like humans instead of replaceable assets. You want me to step down. I want you to prove you've learned something from this experience. Sarah's gaze was steady, unforgiving but not without compassion. The question is, are you capable of that kind of growth, or are you just desperate enough to promise anything? Sterling's answer would determine not just the fate of Nexus Dynamics, but the kind of justice Sarah chose to pursue. She held all the cards now, but how she played them would define the woman she became on the other side of this confrontation. The future waited, balanced on the edge of a decision that would echo through Silicon Valley for years to come. The future waited, balanced on the edge of a decision that would echo through Silicon Valley for years to come. Marcus Sterling sat across from Sarah Connor in the same conference room where he'd destroyed his own empire 6 months earlier, and for the first time in his corporate career he had no script to follow. You want proof I've learned something, he said quietly, his voice stripped of its usual CEO authority. What would that look like? Sarah studied his face, searching for the manipulation she'd grown accustomed to recognizing. Instead, she found something she hadn't expected. Genuine humility born from genuine consequences. It would look like you understanding that this company's survival depends on more than just licensing my patent. It depends on fundamentally changing how you value people. I'm listening. First, Emily Mitchell becomes Chief Technology Officer. She's the only person in your leadership team who actually understood what I brought to this company. Sarah's voice carried the authority of someone who now held the keys to kingdoms. Second, Michael Thompson gets proper mentorship instead of being thrown into deep water and expected to swim. Sterling nodded slowly. These weren't unreasonable demands, though they stung his ego like salt and wounds he'd inflicted on himself. Third, Sarah continued, you establish an innovation fund for employee side projects, the kind of lazy work that you fired me for pursuing. 20% time, protected from interference, with patent-sharing agreements that benefit the creators. And fourth? Sterling asked, sensing there was more. You step down as CEO. The words hit him like a physical blow, though he'd been expecting them since Victoria Hayes had started mentioning, quote, transition planning. Still, hearing it spoken aloud by the woman whose termination had triggered his downfall, carried a particular kind of poetic justice. The board has already suggested similar adjustments, he admitted. Victoria thinks a consulting role might be more appropriate for my skill set. Sarah felt a unexpected pang of something that might have been sympathy. Sterling was arrogant and short-sighted, but he wasn't evil. He was simply a product of a system that rewarded political maneuvering over genuine innovation. His destruction wouldn't change that system, but his transformation might. Marcus, I'm not trying to humiliate you the way you humiliated me. I'm trying to save something worth saving while letting something toxic die. He looked up, surprised by the gentleness in her tone. What's worth saving? The 300 people who work here, the clients who depend on cybersecurity, the possibility that companies can learn to do better. Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. And maybe the possibility that you can learn to do better. Sterling was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he looked up, something fundamental had shifted in his expression. If I agree to these terms, what happens to me? You become someone who made a mistake, learned from it, and helped fix it. That's not the worst legacy a person can have. Through the glass walls, Sarah could see Emily Mitchell pacing near her desk, her face etched with the kind of anxiety that came from watching your world teeter on the edge of collapse. Victoria Hayes stood near the elevators, her political instincts undoubtedly calculating various endgame scenarios. Michael Thompson hunched over his computer, probably still struggling with code that Sarah could debug in minutes. All of their futures hung on this conversation, on whether Marcus Sterling could swallow his pride enough to save something larger than his own ego. I accept your terms, he said finally. All of them. Sarah felt something release in her chest, a tension she'd been carrying for months finally dissolving. This wasn't the crushing victory she'd once imagined, but it was something better, justice that built rather than merely destroyed. Then we have a deal. John Black will draft the licensing agreement. Fair terms, reasonable fees, with provisions for renegotiation if Nexus Dynamics fails to maintain the cultural changes we've discussed. Sterling extended his hand across the table, the same table where he'd once lectured her about team players and corporate vision. Sarah shook it, feeling the strange satisfaction of completing a circle rather than simply winning a war. There's one more thing, Sarah said as they prepared to leave the conference room. I'm partnering with Ryan Stone to create a new kind of tech company, one that actually values the people who create the future. We'll be hiring and we'll be looking for talent that might be undervalued elsewhere. The message was clear. If Nexus Dynamics reverted to its old ways, its best people would have somewhere better to go. It was accountability built into the system rather than imposed from outside. Sterling nodded, understanding the implied threat and the opportunity it represented. I think that's exactly what the industry needs. 2 hours later, Sarah sat in John Black's office, signing agreements that would reshape the cybersecurity landscape while preserving jobs and dignity for people who'd never chosen to be part of this corporate drama. How does it feel? John asked, watching her sign the final documents. Sarah considered the question carefully. Like justice, finally. Not the destroying kind. The building kind. Outside John's window, San Francisco sparkled in the afternoon sun, its glass towers reflecting light and ambition in equal measure. Somewhere in those buildings, Marcus Sterling was explaining to his board why stepping down was the best decision he'd ever made. Emily Mitchell was learning she'd been promoted to CTO. Michael Thompson was getting the mentorship he needed to grow into the developer he could become. And Sarah Connor was discovering that the most satisfying revenge wasn't getting even. It was getting better and helping others do the same. She'd transformed from victim to victor to something more valuable, a force for positive change in an industry that desperately needed it. The future belonged to those who could see it coming, but it was built by those who chose to construct rather than destroy. Sarah had chosen construction, and the reverberations would echo through Silicon Valley for decades to come. Able as a consulting advisor, his role dramatically reduced but his insights surprisingly valuable. The humiliation of stepping down as CEO had been transformed into the wisdom that came from genuine failure and genuine learning. He'd become something he'd never been before, useful in ways that went beyond corporate politics and buzzword presentations. The quantum encryption market has validated Dr. Connor's vision completely, Victoria was saying. Our licensing agreement with her patent portfolio has positioned us as leaders in next-generation cybersecurity. More importantly, the cultural changes we've implemented have reduced our employee turnover by 60% and increased our innovation metrics by over 200%. Sterling nodded, recognizing the irony that his greatest contribution to the company might have been the catastrophic mistake that forced everyone to do better. Sarah Connor saved this company by refusing to save it on our old terms, he said quietly. She forced us to earn our survival. Back at the conference, Sarah was reaching the heart of her message. Ryan Stone and I have built cornerstone innovations on a simple principle. Brilliant minds shouldn't have to choose between personal integrity and professional success. We've created an environment where the Sarah Connors of the world, the quiet innovators, the persistent problem solvers, the people who see the future before anyone else does, can thrive without compromising their values. She paused, scanning the audience for the faces of people she'd met along this journey. "We're hiring, by the way," she added with a smile that earned genuine laughter from the crowd. "And we're looking for people who've been told they're not team players, who've been dismissed as lazy or uncommitted, who've been undervalued by organizations that couldn't recognize talent if it solved their problems for free." The standing ovation began before she finished speaking, but Sarah wasn't done. "The future belongs to those who can see it coming, but it's built by those who choose compassion over revenge, growth over destruction, and justice over vengeance. That's not just good business, it's good for the soul." As the applause washed over her, Sarah caught sight of John Black in the audience, his satisfied smile reflecting the journey they'd taken together from patent application to industry transformation. The attorney who'd helped her weaponize intellectual property law had watched it become a tool for positive change rather than corporate destruction. Later, at the reception, Grace Williams approached her daughter with the quiet pride that only mothers possess. "Your father would be proud," she said simply. "You chose to be the person we raised you to be, even when it would have been easier to be someone else." Sarah embraced her mother, understanding finally that the most satisfying revenge wasn't getting even. It was getting better, and helping others do the same. The woman who'd been fired for being lazy had become a force for innovation. The employee who'd been dismissed as uncommitted had committed herself to changing how the entire industry treated its brightest minds. Outside the conference center, San Francisco sparkled with the ambition of 1,000 companies, each one now operating in a world shaped by the choices made in a conference room where justice had worn the face of a woman once called lazy. The future was brighter for everyone, built one ethical decision at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.